So today is Tuesday. Last Wednesday, I needed to send out the title and key for my old van, which I've only had for less than 2 months, the Honda Odyssey, which I sold in Kalispell, Montana, after purchasing my new van, which I've had only for a couple of weeks now, maybe less than a couple of weeks. Um, and when I went to send that out, I could not send it priority, which was how I originally tried to send it because I couldn't afford it. So I had to send it first class, and after sending it, I had, I think, $1.67 left in my bank account. And then on Thursday, straight after work, I left for New York City with a couple of stops. No, I'm sorry. I left for Indianapolis, then Chicago Thursday, with the first stop being in um, Kalamazoo area to sell a table, which was a table that I found on the curb. But it was a really cool antique table with two antique chairs with antique leather on them. And I sold that for $120 with $20 delivery fee. And then I continued down to Indianapolis. This is how I got the. Now I'm remembering it was a long, long weekend. So this is how I got the money to continue the rest of the trip. And it's the reason I went in this order. I went down to Indianapolis to drop off a fryer for my customer, Munib. And then I drove up to Chicago. And the following morning, Friday morning, I dropped off another fryer. And together, those paid $850. Plus, I had the 120. I already got the $20 up front. I had the next 120 come in for that table. She paid with Venmo, so it took the day to transfer. And then I drove out towards New York City, which I had to stop about an hour and 45 minutes northwest of the city. That was my first stop. Um, Actually, my first stop technically was a stop in Michigan to pick up one more item, even though the van was very, very full. But as luck would have it, I picked up these Ski-Doo bunks that were like 12 feet long and 5 inches by 5 inches square. Um, and then they came with one more small box, and I barely had room for that stuff in the van. Drove towards New York and had an issue with a flat tire on the way. I actually had enough to get all new tires at Walmart, but I ended up deciding, long story short, this story is in a different episode, ended up deciding to just put the spare on. So that added to an already exhausting and long trip. But I got out to New York City. I dropped off 49 boxes of dolls that I had picked up in Henderson, Nevada. That was $1,808. So that was a really big lump of what I have now. And then drove into the city and dropped off a rug that I picked up in Kalispell. That rug, I think, paid $424.50, if I remember correctly. After the fees, I bid over $500 on it, but there's fees. I bid $2,200, I think, on the boxes of dolls. I only saw 1,808. That's how it goes with UShip. But anyways, both were still good. Then I dropped off the um, the Ski-Doo bunks in Orange, Virginia. I'd already been paid for those. The customer there was the company that was sending them, and they paid me $300 up front. Um, and then I got really this whole thing outside of the tire issue, which is just whatever. The test on the front end, I guess. Just got really, really lucky. Everybody tipped me except for the rug. Every single other person that I dropped off for, did a job for this whole time, tipped me. Um, so let's see. Went down to North Carolina and picked up a china cabinet in North Carolina that went to Ohio, Columbus area. And then I also picked up the following day in North Carolina which would have been yesterday. Yesterday was a long day. Um, no, sorry, I picked up the china cabinet the previous evening, and then yesterday I picked up a table, handmade table, beautiful handmade table, and that one went to um, Indiana. Don't remember the name of the town is slipping my mind right now. I'm so tired. But anyways, um, so the table was another like $425, and and the china cabinet was 400. That was cash. That was the one person who I got to do. Oh, actually, the bunks was a direct transaction, and that china cabinet direct transaction. That person who received it though tipped me $50. Um, and then I dropped off the table. That went late into the night. They also did not tip me technically, but they offered me a plate of Spanish rice with yuca and a shredded side salad, and it was absolutely fantastic. Also, just very, very nice people, and visited with them for a little bit, but that also put me getting back super late. So I was so tired last night. I got to about an hour and 6 minutes from home, and I had to pull over at a rest stop and sleep there for the night. Then in the morning, the first time this had ever happened, my alarm did not make a sound when it went off. I kind of kept waking up a few times. I'm like, I had set my alarm for 7. I was like, it's gotta be 7. I can't believe my alarm isn't going off yet. It feels like it's 7. And then I finally checked and I was like, 7:45, what? So, it all worked out. It was raining today. Rain was supposed to let up. I texted my customer, Dave, and I asked him if he'd like to just postpone a little bit to let the rain pass. I could have been there on time, but it would have been very, very rushed. And my help also would not have been ready because he overslept his alarm too. So it worked out perfectly. Today was not a tiring day. I'm just tired from residual tiredness. Um, but today we moved this really incredible, cool, old shelving unit that was out of an old apothecary, over 100 years old, had all labels for the drugs that they would mix right there in the apothecary, in their pharmacy. And so that was super cool. We got it moved. $300 came in. I gave my help $100. He also tipped. I had quoted $150, and that was to bring just me, no help. And then Dave got me a little higher price, and I said, well, if they're going to pay more, I'm going to do more. So I got help, and that turned out to really be a good move. It went really smoothly. And I paid him $100. He tipped me $50, so up from the $250 agreed on price to $300. And then, of course, today I had cash. I had money in both my bank accounts. I have money in UShip, which I initiated a transfer for into the bank account. Added it all together, about $3,600 one week from $1.67 or whatever it was in my bank account. So, what's the lesson here? I don't know. The lesson's different for everybody. One person's going to look at this and say, no way would I put myself through all of that to still be broke AF half the time. And, $3,000, $3,600, that's not a lot of money. A lot of people just have made good, decent, reasonable financial decisions on an ongoing basis. Would find that laughable. Like, why are you excited about $3,600 in your bank account? You literally couldn't afford to buy a Whopper a week ago. But if you do the math, and this is by no means um, even worth doing math on because it's so variable. But just for the sake of argument, this is 1 week, $3,500. Multiply that by 52, and that's like 165,000, 167,000, something like that. So, back when I was in like fifth grade, we'd talk about making six figures, making 100K a year, and it'd be like, wow, no, like, wow, can't imagine ever doing that. That would be so amazing. And literally, quite reasonably, am kind of on track for that. But at the same time, there's expense after expense after expense. Keep in mind this month, I've put $1,000 deposit on a trailer, which I have in my possession now and used today for this job that we did today. So that was really nice. I purchased the van for $2,300. I'm trying to think if there's any other big ticket things. But there's $3,300 that I've spent this month in like the last 2 weeks or less. And so, yeah, I've obviously cut it really, really close a few times. And my takeaway is kind of, if you're going to go in at all, go all in. Yeah, it's questionable. I get it. You could question the logic, the sanity, the decision making process of allowing myself to spend literally all of my money for a step forward with the business. What I like to say and the way I like to think about it is everything is a risk. If you're living life, you're taking risks. And I chose to take the risk of spending all of my money on something that I believe would most likely move my business forward rapidly, and possibly save me from the other risk, which is it's easier to ignore the risk of what happens if you do nothing. What happens if you don't take a step? And that risk was my other vehicle, which was tending towards overworking, the Honda Odyssey minivan. The risk is that that fails and I don't have a vehicle. And I took a calculated risk because the new van could fail and then I wouldn't have a vehicle either. And then I'd be mad at myself for spending that $2,300 when I had it on a van that failed rather than just keeping the one I had. And then at least, even if it failed, I'd have $2,300. But I've already cleared that point where it makes sense. The van is already paid for itself. I already have more money in the bank than I did at the time that I purchased the new van. I already have not only more money, but a more formidable vehicle as well. So it took like 2 weeks to prove those things. In those 2 weeks, it could have completely failed and I would have not had the money, not had the vehicle. Maybe been in a situation where I had somebody's items with me and had to figure that out. And that's a risk that you are constantly taking just by being in this industry at all, but you can minimize it in certain ways. And the ways in which you can minimize it are directly tied to the amount of funds and resources that you have available. If I have a second vehicle, then I can really minimize that because if something does happen to my vehicle, I'm not completely stuck. But every time you purchase something, obviously you're taking on greater responsibility and greater expense as well. Not just the purchase price of the vehicle, but the maintenance, the upkeep, the insurance, everything else. It's all a trade-off. but I think that my mindset and your mindset, if you go into something where you're hustling like this, I didn't do this because I'm interested in it. I kind of was interested in driving across the country, all that, getting paid to drive a car around the country. Who, what adventurous, somewhat young person isn't kind of interested that in some way. But I think also like the idea of making money with a vehicle, that's hustling, right? Um, that's your kind of baseline, basic methodology of making money with a relatively small investment in resources and education and anything else. You don't need a degree. You don't need fancy equipment. You don't need specialization. You don't need very much. You need to have a running vehicle, and then you can start looking at how do I make money with this thing. It's like the most basic American concept ever. So, um, where was I going with that? Yeah, this is a hustle. This is a hustle for me. And if you're going to go into something, which I think there's a great value in this, and I sometimes regret that I didn't take this direction sooner and get more seriously focused on this direction sooner. If you're going to go into something that you feel really passionate about, you really love, it's very important to you, you're focused on something outside of making money. You're focused on, you know, this thing that means a lot to you, and you're doing it because it means a lot to you, not because it's going to make you a lot of money. I think that's awesome. And in that case, obviously, maybe you're not trying to grow it as fast as possible. You're trying to focus on the process and the passion and everything else. You're trying to do it as well as possible, which really I am too, because doing it as well as possible is an integral part of growing it as fast as possible. The better I am at what I do, the more people are going to want to work with me. But the motive is still a little bit different there. My point is that for me, what I'm doing, my goal is to grow it as fast as possible. My goal is to hustle. And I've really started to take ownership of that recently. Because originally it was like, I'm trying to do this thing, I'm trying to do it in the coolest way possible, I'm trying to make it a big adventure, I'm trying to do a bunch of stuff. And then I realized you don't need to make work your adventure. You make work your work, make uh, make yourself successful at it, earn money, so you can go have the adventures you want to have, and not have to figure out how the work works into it. So, um, and I've also just kind of gotten over this internal conflict that I always had about not allowing myself to succeed, and having some sort of mental, spiritual hang up about it, and just said, okay, I'm hustling. That's what I'm doing. Therefore, my goal is to grow my business as rapidly as possible. It's not complicated. And to do that, I think I need to take risks. And when you have more money, when you have more capital, you have more resources, you can afford to not take as much risk. Because doing the same things, it's like if you're always losing Sharpies, you just gotta buy hundreds of Sharpies so that, no matter where you misplace them, you always have some. You're gonna be finding them places, you can find them everywhere, right? Same idea if you have a ton of money. You can start throwing that money around at all sorts of different stuff that may or may not work, putting it different places, buying a bunch of vehicles, buying a bunch of equipment, whatever. If you have a whole huge abundance of money, you're gonna inevitably have some somewhere. And if you don't, then if you want to buy equipment, you either gotta wait a long time, during which time you're gonna have outgoing expenses as well, not just incoming expenses or revenue, profit. And so the risk is you try to wait till you can afford it, and you don't get any closer to being able to afford it because you're trying to keep up on stuff at the same time as you're trying to save. And if you have a business and you're trying to run that business with the smallest, least capable equipment that you can, you're not going to make as much money coming in. So my mentality is buy the thing as soon as you can so you can start benefiting from it sooner. Don't wait until you can afford it with a whole bunch left over, because that point might never happen. And maybe this is all wrong. Maybe this is a terrible way to approach the business, but this is my thought process. I don't think it's crazy. I think it's debatable, but I don't think it's crazy. My thought process is don't take the risk that money dwindles away on other things with nothing to show for it, except for, kicking the can down the road, paying your bills one more month. When you have that lump sum, take it, go spend it on something big that's going to help your business grow quickly. Because the sooner that you buy that thing, the sooner you start to get the benefit of having it. But also be ready to start using it. Like, don't go buy it and then sit on it or let it sit somewhere unused. Go get it and put it right to work. And then the real risk that you're taking is just the risk that it fails almost immediately after you buy it. Because like I said, I had to sit with that risk for like less than 2 weeks. Because now 2 weeks later, if the van fails, I'd still be really disappointed if it failed tomorrow or in the next couple of weeks. I'd still be super disappointed. But for having used it, I'd still be in a better position to recover from that vehicle failure than I was 2 weeks ago. So that's my video for today. Thanks for watching. I hope that this was thought-provoking at the very least. I need to go to bed. I'll catch you later.